We're taught that a mining town dies when the gold runs out, or the silver vein narrows to a thread, or the market for copper collapses. It's a slow, painful death, a community bleeding out one family at a time. But that's not what happened to places like Silver Flats, Arizona, or Jericho's Vein, Colorado. Those places didn't fade. They vanished. Breakfast was served in a crowded mess hall, and be supper the town was a ghost. Tables still set. Tools dropped where they were held. The official records blame mass hysteria, a contagious panic, or a sudden, unexplained exodus. The truth is, the miners didn't just abandon the towns. They sealed them shut from the inside. It started with the knocking. Every miner knows the sound of pick on stone, the rhythm of labor. But this was different. This was a knocking from the other side. A precise, almost polite tap, tap, tap in response to their own blows. At first, it was a curiosity, a joke. Old man Henderson would strike the wall 3 times, and 3 taps would answer. The men would laugh, Kalin it ti, echo of a hollow vein. But the echoes grew smarter. They began to form patterns, complex, rhythmic sequences that would get stuck in a man's head. A miner would wake in the night, his knuckles aching, unconsciously tapping that same alien rhythm on his bedside table. Then the drawings appeared, not on paper, but etched into the stone itself, deep in the exhausted shafts where the lantern light was thin. They were not the work of any human tool. The lines were too smooth, the curves too perfect. They depicted spirals that seemed to shift when you looked away, and geometries that hurt the eyes to follow. They were maps, but not of any landscape above. They were maps of resonance, of sonic architecture, pointing not to a place, but to a frequency. The most brilliant geologist in Jericho's Vein, a man named Professor Albright, became obsessed. He stopped sleeping, spending days and nights below, charting the symbols. He told the foreman, his eyes wide with a terrifying mix of fear and awe, "We've been wrong. We aren't extracting we're picking a lock, and the lock is almost open." The final straw was the mimicry. It began to replicate not just knocks, but sounds. A man would hear his wife's voice, calling him from a deep, abandoned tunnel. Another would hear the crying of his child, lost years before. It learned our sounds, our emotions, and played them back to us like a grisly phonograph, luring men deeper into the dark. The town of Silver Flats didn't disappear because the silver ran out. The silver was the bait. The mountain, or what lived inside it, was using the precious metal to attract the one resource it needed. Master craftsmen of vibration and excavation. We weren't miners. We were surgeons operating on a living, planetary patient that was slowly waking up under our tools. The night Silver Flats went silent. The few who escaped, a young telegraph operator and a cook who'd been out hunting, told a consistent story. There was no panic in the streets. Instead, there was a grim, solemn purpose. The miners, led by Professor Albright, gathered every stick of dynamite they had. But they didn't point it at the mountain's face. They pointed it at the entrance. They weren't trying to collapse the mine to trap whatever was inside. They were trying to trap themselves with it. They had realized the only way to stop the process, to keep the lock from turning, was to sever the connection, to bury the knowledge, the maps, and themselves, the instruments, who had learned too much deep within the earth. The final, massive explosion wasn't an attack. It was a sacrifice, a desperate suturing of a wound they had torn open. So the next time you see a photograph of a ghost town, its windows, like empty eye sockets, don't just see economic failure. See a tombstone. And listen closely to the silence, because it's not truly silent. If you press your ear to the right piece of bedrock, in the right forgotten part of the world, you might just hear it. A faint, patient, rhythmic knocking, still waiting for a reply. The cook, a man named Eli, and the young telegraph operator, Samuel, were the only ones who made it out of the valley. They did not speak of solemn miners or sacrificial explosions. Their story, the one they told to the weary federal marshal who eventually investigated, was simpler. A massive, tragic cavern that took the entire town. It was a story they repeated until they believed it themselves, their minds sanding down the sharp, terrifying edges of the truth. Samuel took to drink and was dead within a year, found frozen in a ditch with a look of profound relief on his face. But Eli carried the silence of Silver Flats with him. He moved to a bustling city, took a job in a loud, steamy factory, and tried to drown out the memory with the clatter of machinery. It almost worked. Until the day, decades later, he read a small, curious article in a geological journal. It described a new sonar mapping technology being used to scan old mining regions for stability. One scan, over the site of Jericho's Vena place, Eli knew only from hushed, fearful stories the Silver Flats miners would tell showed something impossible. The main shaft wasn't collapsed. It was clean. It descended straight down for over a mile, its walls perfectly smooth, as if polished by some immense, gentle force. And at the bottom, the sonar didn't reflect back a solid surface. It returned a chaotic, shifting HOA sonic nullspace, the article called it, a place that absorbed sound and gave nothing back. The lock hadn't been sealed. It had been finished. Eli quit his job that afternoon. He knew then that the sacrifice had been for nothing. Or perhaps it had been part of the process all along. The miners, with their final, desperate act of containment, had provided the final ingredient, a massive, concentrated shockwave of precisely calculated force, the last perfect hammer blow on the lock. He traveled back to the west, not to Silver Flats, but to the archives of a mining college, spending his days poring over old survey maps and engineer S-logs from a dozen different ghost towns. He saw a pattern no one else could. The disappearances followed a sequence, a slow, deliberate migration through the mountain ranges, as if the entity the patient was directing its own excavation, hopping from one mineral-rich heart to another, using human ambition as its scalpel. His research led him to a modern, active mining operation, the Etherid Copper Mine, the largest open pit in the world. It was a place of staggering, brutalist scale, where caterpillars the size of houses clawed at the earth. Eli, an old man with fire in his eyes, managed to get a low-level job in the cafeteria, his true purpose known only to him. He watched, and he listened. He heard the geologists talking about a new, unprecedented copper deposit they'd discovered deep beneath the existing pit, a vein of such purity it defied all known models. They called it the Mother Lode. Their seismic charges, used to map the substrata, were returning strange, harmonic reverberations. They'd created a new field of study just to analyze the singing stone. Eli knew it wasn't singing. It was calling. He tried to warn the site foreman, a pragmatic man in a hard hat who saw only quarterly reports. He was laughed out of the office. He wrote letters to the corporate headquarters, which were intercepted by a PR team who classified him as a lone, eccentric threat. The end for the Etherid mine did not come with a bang, but with a whisper. It was the drills. The massive, rotary drills that chewed through bedrock began to slow, not from mechanical failure, but from resistance. The engineers reported that the rock itself was changing, becoming denser, more fibrous, almost muscular. The drills would stall, and when pulled up, their tungsten teeth were worn smooth, as if they'd been trying to bite through a river of time. Then the knocker returned, not in the deep shafts, but everywhere. In the hydraulic systems of the trucks, a rhythmic thump-thump-thump would appear in the lines. In the generators, a percussive beat would syncopate against the engine's roar. Workers would feel a vibration in their bunks at night, a pulse coming up from the ground, through the steel frame, into their bones. The final transmission from the Etherid mine was not a mayday call. It was a live data feed from the deepest sensor, placed at the edge of the mother lode. It wasn't capturing sound or vibration anymore. It was capturing something else, a pattern of such complex, beautiful, and terrifying geometry that the few scientists who saw it in real time suffered immediate migraines and retinal burns. It was a message. A final, completed equation. The next morning, the entire mine was silent. Every piece of machinery was dead. Not broken, but frozen. The copper vein was gone. not mined, but withdrawn, leaving behind a smooth, obsidian-like cavity, and from the center of the pit, a single, perfect spire of that same black stone had erupted overnight, reaching 100 feet into the air. Its surface was etched with the same spirals and resonant maps Eli had seen a lifetime ago in Silver Flats. We thought the ghost towns were tombs. We were at Railroad Rund, they were nurseries, and the patient is no longer under the knife. It has sat up on the operating table, and it is starting to look around.